I never thought I would become the kind of person who destroys the people who love him most. But that is exactly what I became. And the worst part is, I did it slowly. I did it with full awareness of what I was doing. I watched myself become a monster, one decision at a time, and I told myself it was justified. I told myself I had no choice. I told myself he would understand eventually if he ever found out. But deep down, I knew the truth. I knew I was betraying someone who had only ever shown me kindness. Someone who trusted me more than he trusted his own children. Someone who, when the rest of my family had given up on me, reached out his hand and pulled me back from the edge. My Uncle Richard, and I took everything from him. This is the confession I have been running from for 3 years. This is the story I have never told anyone. Not fully, not honestly. I have given pieces of it to therapists, to late-night journal entries, to the bottom of whiskey glasses. But I have never laid it all out, start to finish, the way it actually happened. I have never allowed myself to see the full picture of what I did, because seeing it clearly meant admitting that I was not a victim of circumstance. I was not a desperate man pushed into impossible choices. I was a liar, a manipulator, a thief. And this is the story of how I became all three. I grew up in a family where money was always the subtext of every conversation. My father, Gerald, was the younger of two brothers. Richard was the eldest, and from the time they were teenagers, it was clear that Richard was the one who would succeed. He was sharp, driven, impossibly focused. He started a small property development company in his mid-20s, and by the time I was born, he had turned it into one of the most successful regional construction firms in the Midlands. Bennett and Sons, he called it, though he never had sons of his own. Just two daughters, Charlotte and Emma, neither of whom showed any interest in the business. My father, on the other hand, was the dreamer, the one who always had a scheme, always had a plan, always had a reason why this time things would be different. He burned through jobs, investments, relationships. By the time I was 10, my parents had divorced and my mother had moved us to a small flat in Birmingham, far from the comfortable life my uncle's family enjoyed. I saw Richard at Christmas, sometimes at Easter. He would arrive in expensive cars with gifts that made my mother uncomfortable and my father resentful. I remember the way my father would watch Richard, the way his jaw would tighten, the way he would find excuses to leave the room. I did not understand it then, but I absorbed it. That silent bitterness, that feeling that the world had been unfair, that Richard had gotten lucky, that we deserved more than we had been given. My father died when I was 19. Heart attack, quick and sudden, no warning. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me, a kind of hardening, a resolve. I told myself I would not end up like him. I would not die bitter and broken, watching other people succeed while I failed. I would make something of myself no matter what it took, and for a while I did. I finished university with a business degree, not from a prestigious institution, but good enough. I got a job at a mid-sized marketing firm, worked my way up, learned the game. By my late 20s, I had saved enough to start my own consultancy. Small at first, just me and a laptop and a rented desk in a co-working space. But I built it. Client by client, project by project. I hired my first employee, then my second. By 30, I had a proper office, a team of 6 and revenue that made me feel like I had finally escaped my father's shadow. Then everything fell apart. The crash was not dramatic. There was no single moment of failure, no catastrophic event. It was slower than that. A major client went bankrupt, owing us 3 months of fees. Another decided to take their marketing in-house. The economy tightened, and suddenly the companies I was pitching did not want to spend money on consultants. I burned through my savings trying to keep the business alive. I took out loans. I refinanced my flat. I told myself it was temporary, that things would turn around, that I just needed to hold on a little longer. But they did not turn around, and by the time I admitted that to myself, I was already drowning. I was 32 years old, and I was $180,000 in debt. My business was dead. My flat was about to be repossessed. I had not spoken to my mother in months because I could not bear to tell her the truth. I had pushed away every friend I had because I could not stand the pity in their eyes. I was completely, utterly alone. That was when Richard called. I remember the day with perfect clarity. It was a Thursday in November, gray and cold, the kind of day that makes you want to stay in bed and never get up. My phone buzzed, and I almost did not answer it. I did not recognize the number at first, but something made me pick up. Marcus, it's your uncle, Richard. I had not heard his voice in years. We had drifted apart after my father died. There had been some argument at the funeral, something about the will, about money that was owed. I never got the full story. I just knew that my mother stopped speaking to Richard after that, and I had followed her lead without really understanding why. I heard you've been having a rough time, he said. His voice was calm, measured, no judgment in it. I want to help. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to tell him I was fine, that I did not need his charity, that I would figure it out on my own. But the truth was, I had no more fight left in me. I was exhausted, beaten, desperate. Why? I asked. We haven't spoken in years. Because you're family, he said, and because I know what it's like to struggle. Everyone forgets that now, but I was broke once too. Before the business took off. I know how it feels to have nothing, to feel like the walls are closing in. I had someone help me back then. Someone who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I've never forgotten that. And I've been waiting for a chance to pass it forward. He invited me to come and stay with him for a few weeks. Just to get back on my feet, he said. No pressure, no expectations. Just a place to breathe and figure out my next steps. He had a large house in the countryside, plenty of room. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 5 years earlier, and his daughters were grown and living their own lives. He was lonely, he admitted. He would appreciate the company. I said yes. I told myself it was just temporary. A few weeks to clear my head, to get away from the creditors and the stress and the constant feeling of drowning. But from the moment I arrived at Richard's estate, I knew something had shifted inside me. Something dark. Something calculating. The house was beautiful. A converted farmhouse on 12 acres with views across rolling green hills. Richard had renovated it himself, using his company's resources, turning it into the kind of home you see in magazines. Every detail was perfect. The kitchen with its hand-carved oak cabinets, the library lined with first editions, the study where Richard kept his collection of antique watches, each one worth more than I had ever earned in a year, and the more I saw, the more I felt that old bitterness rising in me. The same bitterness I had watched consume my father. Why did Richard have all of this when I had nothing? Why had life been so generous to him and so cruel to me? We were blood. We came from the same family, the same roots. What made him so special? I know now that these thoughts were poison. I know now that comparison is the thief of gratitude and that Richard's success had nothing to do with my failure. But at the time, drowning in debt and shame, I could not see it. All I could see was the unfairness of it all. And that feeling opened a door inside me that should have stayed closed. Richard was kind to me in those first weeks. He gave me a room in the East Wing with windows overlooking the gardens. He included me in his daily routines, the morning walks, the afternoon tea, the evening conversations by the fire. He asked about my business, and I told him the truth, more truth than I had told anyone. He listened without judgment, without the lectures I had expected. And when I finished, he nodded slowly and said something I will never forget. You made mistakes. Everyone does. The question is what you do next. The man you become after you fall is more important than the man you were before. I wish I had listened to those words. I wish I had taken them into my heart and let them guide me. But instead, I filed them away as naive optimism from a man who had never really suffered, never really failed. Easy for him to talk about rising from the ashes when he was sitting in a palace built from his success. What I did not know then, what Richard revealed to me gradually over the following weeks, was that his life had not been the fairy tale I imagined. He told me about the early years when the business nearly collapsed 3 times. He told me about the partner who betrayed him, who stole clients and tried to destroy his reputation. He told me about the bankruptcy he barely avoided, the sleepless nights, the marriage that almost ended under the weight of financial stress. He told me about Margaret's illness, the years of watching her fade, the emptiness that followed her death. He was not untouched by suffering. He had simply learned to carry it differently. But I was not ready to hear that. I was too consumed by my own pain, my own resentment, my own desperate need to reclaim some sense of control over my life. And it was in that state of mind that I began to notice things. Small things at first. Details that should have meant nothing but that my calculating brain could not ignore. Richard was not just wealthy, he was extraordinarily wealthy. Far more than I had realized. The property development company had been sold 5 years earlier, shortly after Margaret's death, for a sum that I later learned was in the tens of millions. He had investments, pensions, rental properties, savings accounts across multiple banks. The estate itself was worth several million, and it was fully paid off. He had no debts, no mortgages, no financial obligations of any kind, and he had no plan for what would happen to any of it. His daughters, Charlotte and Emma, were not involved in his finances. Charlotte was a doctor living in London, consumed by her career. Emma was an artist based in Barcelona, drifting through life with little interest in money or responsibility. Neither of them visited often. Neither of them called regularly. Richard spoke of them with a kind of resigned sadness. The loneliness of a father whose children had grown into strangers. I don't blame them, he told me one evening. I was never present when they were young. Always working, always building. Margaret raised them, really. And after she was gone, I think they felt I was more of a stranger than a father. They love me, in their way. But we don't understand each other. It was during this conversation that I first felt the seed of the plan take root. Not fully formed yet. Not a conscious scheme. Just a feeling, a whisper. A sense that there was an opportunity here, if I was willing to take it. Richard needed someone. He was lonely, aging, disconnected from his own children. And here I was, his nephew, the son of his estranged brother, a man in crisis who he had chosen to help. What if I became that someone? What if I filled the space his daughters had left empty? What if I made myself indispensable, trusted, essential to his life? I told myself it was not manipulation. I told myself I genuinely cared about him, which in some complicated way was true. I told myself I was just being smart, just positioning myself for the future, just doing what anyone in my situation would do. But the truth was darker than that. The truth was that I had already begun to see Richard not as a person, but as a resource, a means to an end, a solution to all my problems. The weeks turned into months. I never went back to Birmingham. The flat was repossessed, and I told Richard that I had nothing left there to return to. He offered me a more permanent arrangement. I could stay at the estate indefinitely, help him with some administrative tasks, keep him company. In exchange, he would pay off my debts, all of them. I remember sitting in his study when he made the offer, the fire crackling in the hearth, the weight of what he was saying settling over me like a blanket. $180,000. Gone. Just like that. No interest, no repayment plan, no strings attached. He said it was what family did. He said he had more money than he could ever spend, and nothing made him happier than knowing it was going to someone who needed it. I should have felt gratitude. I should have fallen to my knees and thanked him for saving my life. And part of me did feel those things distantly, like an echo from someone I used to be. But the dominant feeling, the one that rose above the others, was something else entirely. Opportunity. If he was willing to give me $180,000, what else might he be willing to give? If I played this correctly, if I became everything he needed, how far could I push this? The thoughts made me sick even as I had them, but I did not stop them. I let them grow. Over the following months, I transformed myself into the perfect nephew. I was attentive, thoughtful, endlessly available. I drove Richard to his medical appointments. I managed his correspondence. I organized his social calendar, such as it was. I learned about his investments, his accounts, his properties. I made myself indispensable, and slowly, gradually, I began to isolate him. It was not obvious at first, even to me. I did not set out with a clear plan to cut him off from the world. But I noticed that whenever Charlotte called, Richard seemed upset afterward. So I started screening his calls, telling him that Charlotte was probably busy, that he should not take it personally if she did not ring as often. When Emma sent a letter, I would read it first, then summarize it for him, emphasizing the parts that made her seem distant or ungrateful. I told myself I was protecting him. I told myself I was sparing him the pain of their neglect. But I was doing something much worse. I was creating a void and then filling it myself. By the end of my first year at the estate, Richard had changed his will. He told me about it casually one afternoon, as if it were nothing significant. He had left the majority of his estate to me. Charlotte and Emma would receive a small inheritance, enough to acknowledge them but nothing more. The house, the investments, the watches, the art, all of it would come to me. I remember the moment he told me. I remember the way my heart raced, the way my hands trembled slightly, the way I forced my face into an expression of surprise and humble gratitude. I told him I did not deserve it. I told him he should reconsider that his daughters were his blood, that I was just a nephew. But I said it in a way that I knew would not change his mind. I said it so that he could reassure me, so that he could tell me how much I meant to him, so that I could feel both guilty and vindicated at the same time. He took my hands and looked into my eyes with such warmth, such complete trust, that for a moment I almost broke. I almost told him the truth. I almost confessed that I had been manipulating him, that I was not the person he thought I was, that I had been playing a role to secure my own future at the expense of his family. But I did not. I swallowed the confession and smiled and thanked him, and told him I would take care of him for as long as he needed. And the lie continued. The next 2 years passed in a strange blur of comfort and guilt. I lived in luxury, wanting for nothing, while Richard's health slowly declined. Nothing dramatic, just the ordinary erosion of age. His memory became less sharp. His mobility decreased. He relied on me more and more for everything from managing his finances to helping him up the stairs at night. I told myself I was caring for him, which in a practical sense was true. I was there every day. I made sure he ate well, took his medications, saw his doctors. I kept him comfortable and safe. But I was also watching, waiting, counting the days until the inheritance would become mine. The guilt was constant, a low hum beneath everything I did. I could not sleep without medication. I could not look at myself in the mirror without flinching. I started drinking more than I should, not enough to lose control, but enough to numb the edges, to soften the sharp awareness of what I had become. There were nights when I would stand on the terrace and imagine confessing everything, walking away, starting over with nothing. But I never did. The fear was too strong. The attachment to the life I had built, even though it was built on lies, was too powerful. And then Charlotte came to visit. It was the first time I had seen her in person. She arrived unannounced one Saturday afternoon, her car pulling up the drive while I was in the garden. I watched her get out, a tall woman in her late 30s, with Richard's sharp eyes and her mother's auburn hair. She looked tired, stressed, like someone carrying burdens I could not see. When she saw me, her expression shifted. Something flickered across her face, too quick to identify, but I felt it like a warning shot. "You must be Marcus," she said. "Dad's talked about you." "All good things, I hope." "Mostly." She did not smile. I thought I'd surprise him. It's been too long. I led her inside, my heart pounding with something I'd not felt in months. Fear. Real fear. Because Charlotte was not like Richard. She was not trusting, not naive, not looking for someone to fill an emotional void. She was a doctor, trained to observe, to diagnose, to see through the surface to what lay beneath. And from the moment she stepped into the house, I knew she was watching me. The visit lasted 3 days. 3 of the most tense, exhausting days of my life. I had to maintain my role perfectly, never slipping, never revealing the calculation behind every word and gesture. But Charlotte was relentless. She asked questions, subtle ones at first, then more pointed. She wanted to know about Richard's finances, his health decisions, his daily routines. She wanted to know why he had changed his will. He mentioned it in passing, she said one evening, when Richard had gone to bed early. That most of his estate is going to you now. That was his decision, I said carefully. I never asked for it. In fact, I tried to talk him out of it. Did you? It was not a question. And yet here we are. I could feel her suspicion like heat from a fire. She did not trust me. She saw through the performance, saw the cracks in the mask. And for a brief, terrifying moment, I considered the possibility that she would expose me, that she would turn Richard against me, that everything I had built would collapse. But she did not. Not then. When she left, she hugged Richard for a long time, longer than I had ever seen them embrace. She whispered something in his ear that I could not hear, and as she walked to her car, she turned back and looked at me with an expression that I will carry with me forever. It was not anger. It was not accusation. It was something worse. Pity. She pitied me. She saw exactly what I was, and she pitied me for it. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of my shame crash down on me with a force I had never experienced before. After Charlotte left, things changed. Richard became quieter, more reflective. He did not mention our conversation, did not confront me about anything, but I could feel a distance that had not been there before. Some seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing in the silence between us. I should have used that moment to change course. I should have come clean, accepted the consequences, found a way to make things right. But I was too deep in the lie, too committed to the path I had chosen. Instead of stepping back, I pushed forward. I became even more attentive, even more indispensable, working to repair whatever damage Charlotte had done. But the cracks were already forming. 6 months later, Richard had a stroke. It was minor, the doctors said, but it left him weakened, confused at times, dependent on assistance for even basic tasks. He needed professional care now, more than I could provide on my own. I hired nurses, caregivers, a full staff to manage his needs. And I managed the finances. This is where my betrayal deepened into something I can never fully excuse. Because it was not enough for me to wait for the inheritance, to simply be patient and let time do its work. I became greedy, impatient, reckless. I started moving money. Small amounts at first, transfers from Richard's accounts to ones I had set up in my name. I told myself it was just borrowing, that I would pay it back, that the money was going to be mine eventually anyway. But the amounts grew. Tens of thousands became hundreds of thousands. I sold some of his investments and redirected the proceeds. I took out loans against properties he owned, using forged authorizations in my position as his primary caregiver to convince banks that he had approved the transactions. By the time it was over, I had taken nearly £2 million. I do not know how to explain what was happening in my mind during this period. It was as if I had split into two people, the one who did these things and the one who watched in horror as they happened. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was criminal. I knew that if I was caught, I would lose everything, including my freedom. But I could not stop. The more I took, the more I needed to take. The more I lied, the easier the lying became. I was addicted to the feeling of control, the sense that I was finally taking what I deserved, that I was winning after a lifetime of losing. But the truth always surfaces. That is the law of the universe that I was too arrogant to believe applied to me. The exposure began with a phone call. It was Charlotte again. She had hired an accountant, someone independent, to review Richard's financial records. She had been suspicious since her visit, and she had decided to dig deeper. The accountant had found discrepancies, anomalies, transfers that did not match Richard's spending patterns or his documented wishes. She called me directly. I remember the moment the phone rang, the way my stomach dropped when I saw her name on the screen. I knew before I even answered that the walls were closing in. "I know what you've done," she said. No preamble, no room for denial. I have documentation, bank records, signatures that were clearly forged. You stole from my father. I tried to lie. I tried to construct some explanation, some innocent story that could account for the evidence. But my voice was shaking, my mind was blank, and Charlotte was not fooled for a second. I'm giving you one chance, she said. One chance to do the right thing. Come clean to my father. Return what you've taken, and pray that I don't pursue criminal charges. She hung up before I could respond. I spent the next 3 days in a state of paralysis. I could not eat, could not sleep, could not think clearly. Every option I considered seemed impossible. If I confessed to Richard, I would lose everything, his trust, his love, the life I had built. If I ran, I would be a fugitive, hunted by the law and my own conscience. If I did nothing, Charlotte would expose me anyway, and I would face the consequences without even the dignity of having chosen my own fate. In the end, it was Richard who forced my hand. He called me into his study one evening. He was sitting in his usual chair, the one by the window where he liked to watch the sunset. But there was something different about him. He seemed clearer than he had in months, more present, as if some fog had lifted from his mind. "Sit down, Marcus," he said. "We need to talk." I sat. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. "Charlotte told me everything," he said. "The money, the forgeries, the lies." I opened my mouth to speak, but he raised a hand to stop me. "I don't want excuses. I don't want explanations. I just want to understand. I want to look you in the eyes and ask you one question, and I want you to answer me honestly. Can you do that?" I nodded, unable to speak. "Why?" he asked. "After everything I did for you, after I welcomed you into my home, paid your debts, treated you like a son, why did you do this to me?" The silence that followed was the longest of my life. I searched for words, for some way to explain the inexplicable, to justify the unjustifiable, but there was nothing. No excuse, no reason. Just the naked truth of what I was. "I don't know," I finally said. My voice was breaking. Tears were streaming down my face. I don't know why I did it. I was angry. I was scared. I was so deep in debt and shame that I couldn't see any other way out. And then once I started, I couldn't stop. It was like I became someone else. Someone I didn't recognize. I hated myself every day, but I kept doing it anyway. I know that doesn't make sense. I know it doesn't excuse anything, but it's the truth. Richard was silent for a long moment. His face was unreadable, his eyes fixed on some point beyond me. "I trusted you," he said finally. "More than I trusted anyone. And you used that trust to steal from me. Not just money, Marcus. Time. Years I could have spent differently had I known who you really were." "I know," I said. "I know. Charlotte wants me to press charges. She wants you in prison." I did not respond. There was nothing I could say to that. "I'm not going to," he continued. "Not because I forgive you, I don't think I can do that, but because sending you to prison won't undo what you've done. It won't bring back the years. It won't heal the wound. And honestly, I don't have enough time left to spend it on anger." He was dying. I understood that in that moment with sudden, terrible clarity. The stroke had taken more from him than anyone had admitted. He was dying, and he knew it, and he was choosing how to spend his final months. "What happens now?" I asked. "You leave," he said. "Today. You take nothing except what you brought with you. I've already changed my will. Charlotte will manage my affairs from now on. You will not contact me again. You will not contact my daughters. You will disappear from our lives completely." I nodded. There was nothing else to do. "And Marcus," he added, his voice softening just slightly. "I hope you find a way to become the man I thought you were. I hope this haunts you until you earn your way to peace, because that's the only justice that matters now." I left that same evening. I packed a single bag, the same bag I had arrived with 3 years earlier, and walked down the drive in the fading light. I did not look back at the house. I could not. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. I returned to Birmingham with nothing, less than nothing, because my debts had been paid and I had no legal claim to anything Richard had given me. I slept on a friend's couch for a while, then in a hostel, then in a bedsit that cost more than I could afford. I took whatever work I could find: warehouse shifts, delivery driving, call center positions where my voice cracked during conversations with strangers. But the real punishment was internal. The guilt did not fade. It grew. Every night I replayed my time at Richard's estate. Every manipulation, every lie, every moment I chose self-interest over decency. I saw his face when he asked me why. I heard his voice telling me to become the man he thought I was. And I knew that I had squandered something priceless: the love of someone who had believed in me when I had nothing. I started therapy. Not because I wanted to feel better, but because I needed to understand how I had become capable of what I did. The sessions were brutal. My therapist did not let me hide behind victimhood or circumstance. She forced me to confront the choices I had made, the rationalizations I had constructed, the fundamental selfishness that had driven my actions. "You talk about guilt," she said once, "but guilt without change is just self-indulgence. It's a way of punishing yourself without actually doing anything different. If you want to make this right, you have to become someone who wouldn't do what you did. And that takes work. Hard, uncomfortable, daily work." She was right, and so I began. I got a steady job, nothing glamorous, but honest work that paid the bills. I stopped drinking. I rebuilt relationships with people I had pushed away, admitting to them what I had done, accepting their anger and disappointment as part of my penance. I volunteered at a community center, helping young people with job applications and interview skills, trying to pass on what little wisdom I had gained from my own failures. I did not contact Richard. I respected his wishes, but I thought about him every day. I wondered if he was still alive, if he was comfortable, if he had found some peace in his final months. I wondered if he ever thought about me and whether those thoughts were bitter or sad or some complicated mixture of both. And then, 18 months after I left the estate, I received a letter. It was from a solicitor informing me that Richard had passed away. The funeral had already taken place at his request, a small private affair for family only. I was not invited. The letter did not say that directly, but the message was clear. There was no inheritance for me. Richard had kept his word. Everything went to Charlotte and Emma, with a significant portion donated to charities that Margaret had supported when she was alive. The letter included one final item: a personal note from Richard, sealed in an envelope marked with my name. I held that envelope for hours before I opened it. I was terrified of what it might contain: the final judgment of a man I had betrayed, the last words he would ever say to me. But eventually, the need to know overcame the fear. The note was short, just a few lines written in Richard's familiar handwriting, shaky now, but still legible. "Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I want you to know that I spent my final months not with anger, but with sorrow. Not for what you did to me, but for what you did to yourself. You had such potential. You still do. But you'll never reach it as long as you keep running from who you are. I don't forgive you, I can't. But I don't hate you either. I pity you the same way Charlotte did, because you're the one who has to live with this. You're the one who has to face the mirror every day and see what you became. I hope you're working on becoming someone else. Someone better. Someone who deserves the life you almost stole from my family. That's the only way forward, Marcus. Not forgiveness. Not forgetting. Just becoming." Richard. I broke down completely when I finished reading. I cried like I had not cried since childhood. Great heaving sobs that came from somewhere so deep I did not know it existed. I cried for Richard, for the relationship we could have had if I had been honest. I cried for myself, for the man I had been and the years I had wasted. And I cried for the future, uncertain and frightening, but suddenly possible in a way it had not been before. Because Richard was right. There was no path to redemption through forgiveness. Not his, not anyone's. The only way forward was to become someone who deserved to move forward, to earn my peace through the accumulation of days spent doing better, being better, choosing differently than I had chosen before. That is what I have been doing since. It has been 3 years now since Richard died, 5 since I left his estate. I still work at the same job, though I have been promoted twice. I still volunteer, still see my therapist, still work every day on the slow, unglamorous process of becoming a decent person. I do not know if I will ever fully arrive, but I know that the journey is the point. I have not spoken to Charlotte or Emma. I sent them both letters after Richard died, apologizing for what I did, offering to pay back what I stole in whatever installments I could manage. Charlotte never responded. Emma sent a brief reply. She did not accept my apology, but she appreciated that I had made the offer. That was something, I suppose, more than I deserved. I sometimes imagine what my life might have been if I had made different choices. If I had accepted Richard's help with genuine gratitude, if I had worked to rebuild my life honestly instead of scheming for his inheritance, maybe he would have supported me anyway. Maybe we would have become genuinely close, family in truth as well as blood. Maybe I would have been at his bedside when he died, holding his hand instead of living in exile from the only person who had believed in me. But those are fantasies, and I cannot live there anymore. Reality is harder, but it is real. And reality is where change happens. I'm telling this story now because I need it to exist somewhere outside my own head. I need to speak the truth aloud, even if no one is listening, even if it changes nothing. I cheated my uncle out of everything he trusted me with. I manipulated him, isolated him, stole from him, and broke his heart. And then I spent years running from that truth, hiding from it, trying to bury it under layers of rationalization and regret. But truth cannot be buried forever. It surfaces. It demands to be spoken. And when you finally speak it, when you finally let it out into the world, something shifts. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just clarity. The clear, cold light of seeing yourself as you really are. I do not know who will hear this confession. Maybe no one. Maybe it will disappear into the void like all words eventually do. But I needed to say it. I needed to lay out every detail, every choice, every moment where I could have turned back and did not, because that is the only way to ensure I never do it again. Richard asked me to become the man he thought I was. I do not know if I will ever fully achieve that, but I am trying. Every day, I am trying. And maybe that is all any of us can do in the end. Try. Keep trying until trying becomes becoming, and becoming becomes being. I am Marcus Bennett. I was 32 years old when I betrayed my uncle. I am 39 now, and this is my confession. Not for forgiveness, not for sympathy, just for truth. Because truth is the only place where redemption can begin.